Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Better Medicine podcast. I'm Dr. Omar Akhtar. Today, I'm very excited to be talking with Lynae Wood. Lynae Wood is a multi-award-winning interior designer who draws on her background in environmental science to incorporate colors and textures found in nature to bring a sense of balance to a room. That perspective, combined with her unique style and personality, creates a little magic, leaving you with a home you love to live in. Lynae believes that our homes can tell the story of who we are and that a thoughtfully designed space can bring a sense of wellness to those that reside there. Lynae, welcome to the podcast and thank you for your time.
Hi, Omar. Thank you so much for having me.
So this is a very interesting conversation because, as you know, my typical conversations on this podcast are all in the space of intense medicine and hormones and a lot of these discussions with other health practitioners. So in this, I'm very excited to take a step outside of that. And even though we're talking about health and wellness, we're approaching it from a different angle. And that's the point of the show, is better medicine. So I'm really excited about this one. We had a really great chat before.
Yes.
And I want people to understand this concept. And so I'm excited to talk about it.
I'm excited to talk about it too. It's something that is near and dear to my heart. And so.
Awesome. So I do want to ask first for viewers, if you could tell us a little bit about this picture behind us.
Yes. Okay. So this is going to really kind of zone into what we're going to be talking about, and that's wellness in what we call the built environment. So that's homes, businesses. This is a very famous architect, Frank Lloyd Wright. One thing Frank Lloyd Wright did very well was he sort of innately understood the importance of nature and how that can sort of quickly facilitate into our residential homes. And so this is one of the homes. It's called Falling Water, and he actually built it into nature. So his design wasn't based on, a lot of times what we do is, we'll cut down the trees and we'll say, this is the home. And he came at it from a different approach and said, this is nature around the home. Let's build the home into nature. And so you can see the waterfall, and then it's built into the trees and sort of back into the stone. And so even the components he was using that we normally see, windows and concrete, really it was a very thoughtful process for him of each piece he was taking in. And we are seeing a lot of architecture has that concept more and more, but it hasn't fully made its way into residential design. But we're starting to see peaks of it, and that's where I'm really excited about the opportunity as an interior designer to say, hey, we can do this in a different way in bringing the indoors out with the design style that we call biophilic design.
Yeah, it's a beautiful picture.
Yes.
And I want to ask you a little bit, before we dive into biophilic design, I want to ask you a little bit about your journey and what brought you here. You've had a very interesting past, so I'd love to talk about that and what brought you here.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, interesting indeed. I actually did not go to school for interior design. I say I fell into it organically. I actually graduated from Baylor University with a degree in earth science and emphasis in meteorology, with the idea of being a broadcast meteorologist, and I did that for 10 years. So I was on air telling people about weather. That came from a desire that had started when I was about 10 years old. I loved being outside. I loved being in nature. I was enamored by thunderstorms and weather patterns, and so as I got older, I learned more about that. But I just always, when I was outdoors, there was always this sense of calm and peace and wonder that I even felt as a child, which led me into earth science and then broadcast meteorology. In the 10 years I was in TV meteorology, the business changed quite a bit. I wanted to start a family with my husband. And so I had I was always been very creative, and I'd begun to redo furniture in my garage. So kind of take an older piece of furniture, strip it down to the original wood, and then see what I could create. I love that. And I think getting to understand the materiality of the pieces I was working with sort of was my first little step into interior design without realizing it. And then I started to do full rooms for family and friends, and kind of realized I could sense this concept of how a room could be, and bring it together with balance and textures and patterns. And so I did move into interior design. I launched my business in 2020, and I decided a couple years into it, I decided to take a look at some of my projects. A lot of what I do is based on my clients and what they like. And so I had projects that were very different. But I stepped back to take a look at all of them and wondered if I could find something that was a little bit of a through line through each project. And what I found was that in each project, I was incorporating a lot of greenery. I was adding wood walls, wood elements, elements found in nature. So no matter if it was a colorful project or if it was one that was a little more subtle, there were still these pieces that I was adding. And it wasn't until I was listening to a podcast and the person started talking about biophilic design that the light bulbs went off. And I said, oh my goodness, this is what I've been doing the whole time. I just didn't realize it had a name.
Like a structure to it.
Exactly. So I thought, I need to know more about this. And I dove in and really started focusing on what biophilic design is and found that there was just so many components other than just how it looks that are really wonderful, the wellness aspect of it, the studies that have been found when you are in nature, the calmness that comes with it. And I started going, okay, let's be real purposeful now in incorporating that into design.
That's a wonderful story, I want to preface what we're talking about to the listeners so they understand why it is that I'm trying to address this concept, because for me, I think that one of the biggest issues I found in modern medicine is that it's become too linear. And that's been the problem for so long. And what I mean by that is essentially that you have a bunch of symptoms, you go to the physician, and you're essentially given a prescription or multiple prescriptions for that.
Right.
And that is the linear approach that is unfortunately not working for people. And my own desire has been to be outside of that space, outside of that way or approach, let's say, and be in a much, in a much more holistic approach, right? And I know that word gets thrown out a lot, but we're really talking about an approach that really incorporates that whole person. So not only how can they get better with prescriptions and with medications, but how can they get better as a person, as a human being, right? Because ultimately that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get people better and heal. That's why we went into this profession in the first place. And so finding ways to do that goes outside of the traditional realm of just, some supplementation, some medication. And this plays into that. I think that, so many people struggle with mental health symptoms, anxiety, right? So much, even after the pandemic, much more. And so this is a 360-degree approach, which is why I love this so much, that we are trying to, that you are definitely doing, and I'm trying to make sure that all the tools that I can use are there at my disposal. So.
And there's been some fascinating studies done by, I think John Hopkins did one on just patients who are in a room and maybe they're looking at blank walls versus patients that are in a room that can see outside and get a little piece of that nature tend to have faster recoveries. And even, on a larger scale, a lot of big corporations are understanding this in terms of their workers, their employees, providing them a biophilic environment that actually incorporates and stimulates productivity. It creates a sense of wellness. I mean, and it really, it's what you're saying, it's not hard to just step outside and think about when you do go for a walk. A lot of times if you're anxious and you take that walk and it's a good 20-30 minute walk, there's greenery and you're breathing in fresh air, you can almost feel everything kind of quieting down in your body. And so, I feel like, it's there, and I'm so glad you're looking at it from that perspective, because I think so much of this is just right outside of what we typically think of in medicine and wellness, and we're already doing it in a lot of ways, but how can we incorporate that into our built environments, into healthcare facilities where that is a really thoughtful process in the entire building of the building, but then in what they're bringing in as well. And there's some simple ways to do that, but the good news is we're already seeing that a lot of hospitals and medical facilities are starting to embrace this idea of biophilic design in their rooms. And not only that, in corporations, and then now trickling down into residential homes as well.
Right. I think some healthcare facilities are very forward-thinking in this regard in terms of their design, and not only that, but just stuff outside of the box, like music therapy. Sometimes they'll have someone there playing an instrument, and that could be a big source of healing for people. And So I think in this case we're talking about design, but there are so many other aspects to it. So let's define for people what is biophilic design.
Yeah, that's a
This
great,
is
that's a
new
great
for
question,
me,
right?
so tell me about biophilic design.
You know, it's really simplified is the idea of bringing what we love about nature indoors and into where we're living. And so that's going to be components like natural light, sunlight, vitamin D, getting more of that in. It's going to be components like, well, as you said, you know, what you smell and what you hear, those items. Also fractals, which is, it's like, what is fractals? I kind of explained fractals as something that makes our brains very happy. We don't know why it does exactly, but I think it's probably the symmetry in it. So if you think of, say, throwing a little rock in a pond and you see the rings coming out, and they're rings, but they're getting bigger and smaller, and your brain is like appreciating the size, the pattern and size difference. Another way to look at it is if you're walking down a sidewalk and you look down at a picket fence, you technically know all of the pickets are going to be the same size, but they're in descending order if you look down, so it looks like it's getting smaller. And our brain loves kind of those fractals where it starts off smaller and gets bigger, it starts off bigger and gets smaller. There's something about that that makes our brains very happy. And I don't know if they've exactly figured out what it is, but there's one book that I've really enjoyed reading, and it's from the architect in Colorado named Don Ruggles, and he talks about sort of what is beauty, and can we break that down into a scientific way? And one of the things he talks about is how our brains like fractals, and that's pretty impressive when you can start to break it down into that. Then when you know what we like, you can start incorporating those into design, into architecture, and you get those. You know, people may look at something and they may not know why they love it, but they do.
Yeah, that's a really important point. I think what I was interested, or what got me very intrigued reading about this when we were discussing this, was the intersection between, you got medicine and all the scientific realm of things, and then this thing that you just mentioned, which is the inexplainability of certain things, like the part of beauty that's intangible, right?
Right.
That you can't boil down to a scientific equation. And interestingly, I think these two, even though they're on two different ends of the spectrum, there is an intersection between them. To where I was fascinated to find that biophilic design actually has tangible benefits on your physiologic, like your physiology.
Yes.
It improves your heart rate and it decreases your stress. So these are things that you can now measure.
That's right.
So tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, that's right. There have been these studies that have found that when someone walks into a well-designed room or a space that they find comforting and beautiful, that their heart rate goes down. They almost feel this sense of calmness, and that there's even serotonin that gets released from that beautiful space. You may get the opposite, though, when you walk into a room that's cluttered or that just doesn't feel right, or your heart rate starts to pick up a little bit. I was recently experiencing this, and I had to step out of myself and thought, oh, this is what's happening. I was in a space that I was seeing a lot of things that were, you know, needed repair and were kind of in disorder, and I wasn't comfortable in that situation. I wanted to leave that situation. I was able to kind of step back and go, I think I know what's going on here. It's the environment around me, and so then just kind of talk myself and say, this is going to be fine. I need to get through what I'm getting through. But what that does say is that, again, there is these aspects to health and wellness, you know, the release of serotonin. We all could use more of that, just that calm feeling that comes over you. And we can help impart that into interior design. One of the things that I love to work with my clients on is color, because I found that each person has colors that are sort of innate to them, that they find beauty in. For instance, my mom loves blues. I tend to like greens and mauve colors better. And so what I've done in my own home is incorporated the colors that me and my family enjoy. And I think when we see those, we inevitably feel more comfortable. I call them our life colors. They're the colors that we're naturally drawn to. So when I'm working with a client, I'm really working on trying to make sure that we're finding those life colors, those things that just, for some reason, make them happy, and make sure to incorporate those in their design. And I think one area that I've been able to kind of do that no matter what is with greenery. And they've done that very well here in the studio, where really greenery, whether it's faux or real, I prefer real, but faux works as well. There's something about it that reminds you of the outdoors or being outdoors, and I think that gives you, again, that little bit of release of calmness. And it's really fascinating, really is, when you think about being able to take some of these things that are outdoors and bring them in. And that would also include materials like wood and wood grain, really beautiful, like walnut wood grain, a beautiful stain on it, or marble. You know, a lot of times you see something in marble, it's just beautiful. There's something about it that's just, wow, that's gorgeous, that's beautiful, that's lovely. And so even incorporating those types of things into design.
Yeah. I think I've mentioned to you that I've noticed this thing where I feel like when my mind is more cluttered, I go and look at my closet and find that my closet is more cluttered. So there is a direct correlation there. And often it's something as simple as just cleaning up or organizing your environment that actually has these physical benefits or mental benefits on you. So I want to talk a little bit about the mental health aspect of it, because I think the physiological part is really good, you know, just the calmness, the heart rate decreasing, all of those things, which for people that have very overactive nervous systems, that is such an important thing. But tell me a little bit about it from the perspective of depression, anxiety, you know, these disorders, these issues that so many people are struggling with. How do you see biophilic design fitting into those specific mental health issues?
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful question, and something that, you know, we are dealing with on a pretty large scale here in the United States. So for me, again, it's going back to some of these practical natural applications, for instance, sunlight, vitamin D. So for me as a designer, if I'm walking into a room, and maybe I know that that's something that my clients have suffered with, I've worked with some clients, you know, where there's a little bit of that, and I'm like, well, this room is very dark. Let's see if we can get some additional light in. So we may be looking at, you know, how can we brighten this up? Maybe we're bringing in furniture that's a little bit lighter instead of a deep dark brown furniture. So it can be as small as aspects of that. You know, but then when you really get into the meat of you know, what a built environment or an environment is like, you know, we know that sunlight is important. We know that bringing in the greenery is important. We also know that the design, if there's balance in the design, that can also give you a sense of peace just being where you are. What I've found really fascinating is that this has been really embraced by large corporations in the terms of what they're building for their employees. I think I heard that Apple had created, when they designed their, I'm trying to think where they designed it. Was it Cupertino?
Was it California?
California, yes, it was in California. When they were creating the headquarters, one of their headquarters, they really were thinking of their employees as their clients and wanting to give them a place that was really built for them. So they incorporated areas with a lot of natural light, a lot of outdoor space, even some outdoor work areas, which I think is actually a really incredible idea. And I think we can take that and still use that in terms of what we're doing, you know, in our own homes, a beautiful space outdoors that just feels nice, a place to sit and relax. And what they found was that it increased productivity. So that's, you know, going back into the mental state and saying, how can we sort of wake that up and keep it interested and keep it calm and keep it productive, not only for the, you know, the company they're working for, but then just the individual. And I think when you start looking at the individual and kind of taking each opportunity that you can find to sort of make their environment feel a little bit better, then that's going to be something that carries with them. And that's one thing I love about interior design, is that when we work with clients, we really get to know them on a deep level, and so we can, you know, they almost become almost like family, where they share things with me and I share things with them, and really we're all working to sort of better their environment, so that when they walk in, and I can say from a personal standpoint, just being in a place you love can really help with, when life gets tough, as it always does, that feeling of comfort. We moved into our home, I guess about 9 years ago, and we wanted to do the kitchen, but we just never got to it. And it was one of those kitchens that was a basic builder kitchen. They took the extra flooring that they had used, and they put it as the backsplash in the kitchen. And I was so embarrassed. I didn't even want people to come over because I thought this looks so bad. And we finally redid the entire kitchen. And I can tell you that I personally got to really feel that change. I got to practice what I preach, which is that when you live in a home you love, like when you walk in and you're not embarrassed about it and you just feel like this is me, there's a sense of calmness. So even when I have 2 young children, so life gets a little bit crazy, business gets a little interesting and tough, or just, life in general is difficult. I can walk in and sort of take a deep breath and be like, this is my home though, this reflects who we are, and I love where I live. And I think that can't be underestimated, and so often it is underestimated.
Yeah, it's a momentary calm in an otherwise crazy, chaotic world in life. So it's nice to have that space.
And not having, and sometimes when you walk into a space where you're not comfortable, it can raise cortisol levels.
The opposite effect.
Opposite effect. So really, really just moving into that. And I'm really very happy to see how far the idea of biophilic design is coming, and how far we'll continue to go, and how it's now trickling. Usually with commercial design, that's typically a little bit ahead. I think actually, I would say even wellness centers, hospitals kind of clung to this first, this idea of there's something here that we need for our patients. And that's kind of where it started to gain some momentum, and then other larger corporations were able to say, hey, we can pull this piece and incorporate it to help our employees have a better working environment. And then now we're moving that into, okay, but we can take some of this and move it into the everyday life of people. And so I always encourage people, greenery is big, and a lot of times that's what's missing, or even just lighting. Sometimes when your house is dim, it kind of just continues to focus. It feels a little bit dark and dimmer. So pop some lamps in the corner, bring some greenery in, and I think that almost immediately starts to change sort of the effect of the room.
I'm curious if you can speak a little bit more to the neuroscience of this, if possible, because I think that a lot of people will hear what we're saying and then they will appreciate it, but they may want to know what are those actual neuroscience things that we have been able to see in the research that supports the use of biophilic design in your health and wellness.
Right. Well, there's neuroaesthetics, and so that's still they're still doing a lot of research on it. It's still somewhat fairly new, but even in terms of sensory. So we're waiting for some of that to come out. But what we have found is, it's kind of what we've been saying, is that there is an obvious change when people are able to sort of have the effects of the benefits of nature. And these are all often hard to quantify in terms of, well, what is the exact amount of sunlight you need, or greenery you need, and it does depend on the person. But again, it goes back to this idea of the calmness. And I think when, as a person, when you can find a place to be calm and center yourself, then that can't always be quantified in terms of, well, you were able to calm yourself 85%, right?
Like
scientifically. So it does. I mean,
equation to say that.
I love what you're asking. I wish I had more concrete evidence on that. I think we're going to be getting more in the coming years. I know that there are a lot of places that are really focusing in and now trying to quantify some of those effects.
And I actually think that I don't want to fully quantify it, because I think there's this aspect of this world that we live in that becomes over quantified. Every single thing is now something you can scientifically get to, and if you can, then that's what's considered right or true. And a lot of things outside of that is becoming the sort of something we can't really explain through science, maybe through these methods, is getting shoved aside as not true, or and this comes in the realm of the more spiritual side of things, which I am definitely a proponent of. But unfortunately, in this more technological, quantified-driven world, that gets lost. And so, to some degree, I do like this uniqueness and this intangibility that it has.
Right, but I'm with you, and I'm excited to see more of the work come out on. We've studied this, and we are able to kind of say this is what we're finding works better. What we do know is that I think, again, that going back to that John Hopkins study, is that when people were able to have the visuals sort of where nature were, maybe even just being able to see outside, and that maybe stimulates something in the brain. And this is conjecture here, but maybe stimulates something in the brain that allows for some healing to go on, because they can sort of see what's out there, and then, you know, the blue skies. I can just go back to how I feel when I'm outdoors, and where that correlation exists. I think that's a fascinating question, and I want to see more on it, and I want to read more on it. There was this one study done, and I think they're calling it the Biophilic Index, and that's kind of what they're looking at too. How much of sunlight, how much of greenery, colors, how do those play? Because a lot of times we are finding that when people see certain colors, there is a positive reaction to that. And how do we balance that out with you know, design and comfort as well? Like when you walk in your home, you want there to be a certain amount of comfort when you sit. So it's really kind of taking into effect all of our senses. Right. And then how do we design around that? How do we build around that? How do we treat patients around that, so that it gives them the best opportunity for healing and moving forward?
Yeah, very important. One criticism that I feel people will have is they will see this and us talking and think that we're talking from a perspective of, oh, this is only what the rich can afford. This is only what someone who has a lot of money can afford to do in terms of interior design and make your house look like that or something.
Right.
So what is your message, or what are your main tips for someone that might be living in, let's say, a one-bedroom apartment? Maybe they're in 500 square feet of space or something like that. Or what are those things that they can do without necessarily breaking the bank to completely renovate their interior? Simple things that they can do. I know you mentioned a few things, but do you have specific tips on that?
Yeah, no, that's a wonderful question, and that's one thing I love about design is yes, there are ways to get sort of the big picture items with a big budget, but there are so many small things you can do. One of the things that I love to do when I walk into a room, and say it's dark, but there is like one window. So what I'll do is I will place a mirror across from that window. It almost acts as if another window is bringing in light on both sides. And so that can be really helpful. I'm a firm believer in natural light in our environments, in our built environments, and in our residential. So I'm always looking for ways to create that sense of natural light coming in. I think that's a stimulant for us to just kind of like wake up and enjoy a little bit of what's going on outside in our homes, instead of having the TV on and things that sort of distract you in that way. So that's one really easy way, is to add a mirror directly across from a window, and that's going to increase your natural light. I've mentioned it several times, but it's probably one of my biggest assets when I'm designing and decorating is to bring in greenery. And if I can bring in a plant, and maybe, I wouldn't say I have a green thumb. I don't have a black thumb either. I have whatever's right in between, a brown thumb maybe. But even bringing in small plants that are not easy to kill, little succulents, popping those in and around. But there's, I think, something too really special about nurturing a plant, even if even if you're not great at it. Something about, I'm taking care of this little thing, and it can't water itself, so I'm going to have to remember to water it. I think it takes a little bit of practice, but it can be really beautiful also to see when it does start to bloom and when it does start to blossom.
It's something outside of yourself, so it's almost like a distraction in a way for people that are struggling.
Yes.
It could be a good way of shifting their focus to something else too.
I absolutely agree with that, and I think that is, that's something too. I know in like you said, in the medical world, we love to have those solid. And this is a little bit more abstract, mystical, if you will, spiritual, but also really important. And I think the medical world is doing a great job of bringing some of that in and saying, okay, there might be something to this that we can look at. So this kind of probably falls closer to those lines. Another aspect, and again, goes back to your life colors. What are the colors you really like? If you can find some art with that in it and put that on the wall, then when you get to see that, I have some art that I did personally using colors that I love, and sometimes just after a long day, I will look up and I'll see it on the wall and I'll think, okay, that at least feels right. When everything else is feeling wrong, but this feels right. So that's another way. Find those colors that you enjoy and bring them in. And then also just lighter colors on the walls. If if you're feeling sort of that frustration of just life and a little bit of depression, anxiety, I do think lighter walls versus darker walls tend to be better. And anytime you can bring in some materiality in terms of wood grain, maybe you can't afford a full-on marble kitchen, but maybe you could bring in a tray, with some glasses on it. Just sometimes those little, small, pretty things, I think, especially for women, can help with, okay, this is beautiful. I have something beautiful in my home, in my life, and that you can kind of use that to kind of work to the next stage.
Yeah, very good. I think that part is very important to address, just so people realize that this can be for everyone, not just for someone who is, affording and can completely change their space.
It's for everyone. And these are, again, just think of what you love about nature. Maybe you love the beach, so maybe that is incorporating, some of the sand Zen gardens and playing with that a little bit just to relax the mind. And really, it's kind of just what makes you happy. And that's usually what I ask my clients. What makes you happy? Where's your happy place? How can we incorporate some of those things that inherently bring you joy and place them into where you live? And I think that's a really special job that I get to do, and I really enjoy it.
Awesome. Well, are there any last messages you wanted to give our viewers listening to this? And also I wanted to know where they could find you.
Yes, thank you. I do think, as we've discussed, this is sort of, it's not a new concept, obviously, because Frank Lloyd Wright was one of our great examples, and this has been going on, but I think, this has stretched back to many, many years before us, and ancient civilizations, they were using some of these techniques, and we're now I feel like coming into a refocus on them. And then now we're kind of also moving one step forward of how can we use this for health, and how can this benefit the overall person. And so I think once you hear biophilic design and you kind of know a little bit of what it is, you'll start to see it and hear it more in our when you're out and about, you might hear the word, and then you can focus a little bit more and start to see it. And I think once you start to see it, it's hard then not to see it. I mean, I'm again looking at the spaces we're in today, and I'm seeing it with the wood wall. We're seeing a lot of that.
Yes.
The natural elements they've put in, the greenery. So, and when we walked in, both of us said, "Wow, this is really beautiful. This is really lovely." So I think once you start to kind of see those, once you know what it is and then you start to see them in play, then it makes it easier to see it in your environment as well, and then see the benefits of it as well when you walk into that type of room. So you can find me. I'm active on both Instagram and Facebook. Redefine Designs is the name of my company. I love that name because when I first started, I really wanted to redefine how interior design was seen. And so Redefine Designs is the name of my company. And I also have a website, redefinedesignsco.com.
Awesome. Yes. Well, Lynae, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. And this was a fantastic discussion.
Thank you, Omar. Thank you. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah.